and welcome to today's lecture on mystery religions. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we're going to talk about those religions that existed outside of the traditional Roman pantheon. Now, a lot of these mystery religions have something in common. There's some sort of secret rites of initiation. And then also, once you go through that initiatory process, there's something that religion promises you on the other side. So as long as you're not afraid of descending into the darkness to get eternal light, journey with me as we investigate mystery religions.
When it comes to ancient Roman religion and mythology, most people think of it as an offshoot or bastardization of its Greek counterpart. Jupiter is simply Zeus reimagined. Hera is no less than Juno. Minerva is Athena, goddess of war and wisdom. But this traditional pantheon of Roman gods isn't the only thing that's worshipped in the ancient Roman world. Let's take a look at some of the smaller religions, the mystery cults, if you will, that pervaded ancient Roman religion.
Now, one of the things that made the ancient Roman Empire so successful is that there were relatively few rules, right? Especially when it came to religion. You had to worship the emperor and you had to pay your taxes. And other than that, you were pretty much free to do what you wanted. And so perhaps it's no surprise that especially the Roman army, who operated largely on the outskirts of empire, they interacted with a lot of different cultures who held different religious beliefs. And a lot of those beliefs become kind of adopted and incorporated into the larger practice of Roman religion.
These are frequently known as mystery religions for three reasons. First, our understanding of them is still rudimentary compared to many other aspects of Roman religion. Second, the cults themselves often remained secretive, not sharing their practices with the uninitiated. And third, these cults often revealed some mystery, an artifact or knowledge or sacred object, to initiates upon completion of their initiation.
Now, this process of becoming initiated and learning something secret is one of the commonalities between a lot of different mystery religions. And we'll see that usually occurs by kind of going through this initiatory process of secret rites. One of the other things that's common to a lot of mystery religions is that they tend to incorporate a much broader group of people than kind of is usually privileged in ancient Roman society. So it'll often incorporate, women and foreigners and slaves and freed people, that sort of thing. And that's certainly the case with one of the most successful mystery religions that we'll get to a little bit later in this lecture.
Dionysus has always been a rather strange and mysterious god. Through his associations with wine, he seems to instill madness in his followers, which basically embodies the opposite of what it means to be civilized like a good Greek or Roman. But part of the role of this madness is the ability to subvert normal societal roles. All of a sudden, women could have power, or the dispossessed could assert authority.
Now, very little is known about the Dionysian mysteries, and much of our evidence is actually visual rather than textual in nature. It comes from a house called the Villa of the Mysteries at the site of Pompeii. It's just on the outskirts of the city walls, a nice suburban villa. And there, in one of the rooms, there's floor-to-ceiling frescoes that depict what we think are the initiatory rites of the Dionysian mysteries. And so just keep in mind that we're kind of dealing with something visual here rather than something textual, so there's a lot of interpretation that goes on, kind of a lot of guesswork in some ways, in terms of how we think this mystery religion worked.
The process begins with the initiate entering, bringing a basket of biscuits or cookies or something of the sort. She sits at a desk and prepares for the rites. Eventually, she rises and seemingly flees, flinging her scarf above her head. Soon the satyr Silenus appears, with Dionysus lurking in the closet. The initiate begins to be whipped by a winged character, either a divinity or a mortal in dress. Finally, the initiate has survived the rites, and is seated upon her throne, dressed once again, and ready to have the secrets revealed.
So all in all, this is still pretty darn confusing, even with the frescoes. But there's another aspect to the Dionysian mysteries too. Orgies, of course. Now, in the Dionysian mysteries, orgies tend to be a little bit less about sex and more about tearing things apart. Just like happened to poor baby Dionysus, according to the Orphic version of his birth.
The cult of the goddess Isis begins in the Hellenistic period, after the Greek Ptolemies take over Egypt, and it continues well into the Roman world. But Isis herself goes far back before the Greeks and Romans. She's an Egyptian goddess first and foremost, and as the sister of Osiris, she's most famous for having recombined his dismembered body and raised him from the dead, giving birth to both the king god Horus and to the practice of mummification in the process. And while the associations with Osiris disappear in the Greco-Roman mystery cult, the focus on life after death certainly remains.
Now, a lot of what we know about the cult of Isis comes from a 2nd century CE text known as the Golden Ass, written by a guy named Apuleius. And in this story, the poor old protagonist, he's been turned into a donkey. And the story is of him trying to get back into human form. And part of that process involves him being initiated into the cult of Isis.
The description begins plainly enough, with the purification of the initiate by water. But what happens next in Apuleius' novel remains obscure, almost paradoxical. We know that the initiate metaphorically travels both to the underworld and to the heavens, and that he's in total darkness, but also sees the sun, and that at some point he approaches the gods themselves. Many scholars see these experiences as referencing the process of symbolic death and rebirth, and when combined with the ritual purification, it seems to share many similarities with early Christianity.
Now, one of the cool things here is that we actually have archaeological remains of temples to Isis in the Roman world. But it's a little confusing because it doesn't seem to exactly match the textual description we have, right? So there's no kind of like stairs down to an underground chamber. But, we think perhaps like the kind of rooms were blacked out and there was some sort of fire, perhaps illuminating frescoes of the gods. That's how you see the gods.
Many of the mystery religions imported to the Roman world were particularly popular with the Roman army. And this makes sense when you consider that they're the ones on the outskirts of the empire, coming face to face with foreign cultures and unfamiliar religions on a regular basis. This is certainly the case with Mithraism, a mystery cult to the god Mithras, who originally was based on the Persian and Zoroastrian god Mithra. Just like with the cult of Isis, our understanding of the specific rites of initiation is cloudy, but archaeological evidence of the cult of Mithras abounds.
Now, the most famous image from Mithraism is undoubtedly the tauroctony, basically the killing of the bull. And here we have Mithras, right, kind of with his knee on the back of the bull, looking backwards. Mithras, you can always tell by his Phrygian cap and his flowing cape. And he's stabbing the bull in the neck. And then there's a snake and a dog, and both of these animals, they kind of nip at the blood of the bull. And then there are two attendants, either carrying torches or a shepherd's crook. And the general interpretation of this scene is that through the death of the bull, life is reborn.
What little we know about the process of initiation comes from the archaeological preservation of Mithraea, or temples to Mithras. These always occur in dark, windowless, underground chambers. And we have evidence of them everywhere from Italy to Britain to Africa. A description of the initiation process from St. Jerome, along with a series of mosaics from the Roman port of Ostia, suggests that there were 7 levels of initiation, starting with the raven and ending with the father, each one associated with particular symbols and heavenly bodies.
We do know that there was a lot of feasting involved. That's probably the second most common image we get associated with Mithraism. But the rites themselves are still pretty obscure. We think that perhaps they recreated scenes from the life of Mithras, so something like shooting an arrow at a rock to kind of get water to come out of the rock. We also think that there was perhaps a series of challenges, so things associated with heat or cold or water that the initiate had to go through to progress to the next level.
Within the context of the Roman world, we see that mystery religions, while certainly mysterious, weren't all that unusual. In fact, they were relatively common ways for those on the margins of Roman society to achieve something that the Roman state religion, or Roman culture more generally, wasn't providing them. And one of the main themes, and perhaps promises, of these mystery religions was some sense of life after death. And within this context, early Christianity certainly fits the characteristics of a mystery religion.
Now, because Christianity is so popular in America today, it's easy to forget that this arose out of the context of the ancient Roman Empire. And so most scholars actually believe that there was a historical Jesus who was born under the reign of Augustus and crucified under the reign of Tiberius. And the writers of the Gospels, they lived during the 1st century CE. And Paul the Evangelist, he lived during the 1st century as well. And in fact, he was crucified under the reign of Nero in the aftermath of the giant fire in Rome in 64 CE.
When you look at the rituals involved in Christianity, they resemble what we know about other mystery religions. With baptism, you have the ritual purification with water, just like is present with the cult of Isis and the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter. With communion, the breaking of bread and drinking of wine as the symbolic or real body and blood of Christ, you get the ritual feasting, much like with the cult of Mithras. And like both Mithras and Isis, you get the promise of the afterlife, something that official Roman religion said little about.
And you can imagine how attractive this was to the disenfranchised populations in ancient Roman society. Because the focus wasn't on your kind of actual life, right? No matter how bad you had it, the important thing was the afterlife. And you could be blessed for all of eternity if you believed. And not only that, but it was open to those most disenfranchised, right? Slaves and women and foreigners and freed people. Everyone could have the kind of blessings and gifts that Christianity promised. Now, mystery religions were welcomed in the ancient Roman world as long as you still worshipped the emperor. And this is why Mithraism wasn't a problem at all, while Christianity became quite the big problem. Another commonality here is that we end up with these rites being kept fairly secret, right? People go through some sort of initiatory rites and process and then get something on the other side, right? Access to a special kind of object or piece of knowledge or promise of the afterlife. And one of those mystery religions, right, Christianity, has evolved into one of the most kind of popular religions in the world 2,000 years later. Just a couple takeaway lessons you can learn from mystery religions.